Ever strolled through a glittering city marveling at its skyscrapers and wondering, how did all this even happen? Today's deep dive takes us right into the heart of such a city, into the fascinating world of the UAE.
And beyond those dazzling facades lies a political landscape just as intricate as any desert mosaic.
You got that right. Our listener wrote in wanting to unpack the political system of the UAE, and honestly, the Wikipedia article they sent on the politics of the UAE had us hooked from the first scroll. And it's not every day you encounter a system that challenges your whole understanding of how countries work.
It's a real head-scratcher in a good way, because the UAE isn't quite what it seems at first glance. Take this for starters. It's not actually a single country in the traditional sense.
Okay, wait, what? That blew my mind when I first learned about it. Please explain.
The UAE is a federation of 7 emirates. Think of it like 7 distinct mini-kingdoms, each with its own ruler coming together under one banner. That's why you'll often hear it referred to as the United Arab Emirates, emphasizing that united aspect.
So it's not just one big sheikh calling all the shots.
Not exactly. Each emirate has a surprising degree of autonomy. They have their own internal governments, their own laws, and even control their own resources.
Wow, so it's like a constant negotiation between these 7 emirates. That's got to make for some interesting power dynamics, especially with a place as economically powerful as the UAE.
You hit the nail on the head. You see, this whole system is held together by this intricate balance of power, a balance largely shaped by one pivotal event: the discovery of oil in Abu Dhabi back in 1958.
It's like finding out the wizard behind the curtain is actually an oil baron. But how did this discovery actually translate into political power?
Imagine a game of cards where one player suddenly gets dealt a royal flush. That's Abu Dhabi after striking oil. This newfound wealth catapulted them to the forefront, not just economically, but politically as well. It gave them leverage and influence, the kind of clout that can reshape an entire nation.
Okay, so Abu Dhabi becomes the big player because of its oil wealth. But how did that actually play out in terms of governing this federation of emirates? Did it lead to tension? Resentment?
It's never quite that simple, and that's what makes the UAE so fascinating. They've managed to maintain this delicate balance, think of it as a political high-wire act, by weaving together those modern political structures with their more traditional tribal roots.
You mean the system of 7 emirates, each with its own ruler, isn't some brand new modern invention?
Not at all. It's deeply rooted in their history and tribal traditions. Before the UAE was even a twinkle in the world's eye, these emirates were already distinct entities, each with its own ruling family and way of life.
So even with oil wealth shaking things up, those old school power structures still held sway. But how do you actually classify a system like this? We've got elements of a federation, a monarchy, and even whispers of a democracy.
Get ready for it because it's a mouthful. The UAE is officially a federal presidential elective constitutional monarchy. It's a system designed to bridge the seemingly contradictory worlds of centralized power and emirate autonomy.
Okay, so we've got this federal presidential elective constitutional monarchy, which sounds like they threw every form of government into a hat and pulled one out at random. But how does that actually function in practice? It's like, who is actually calling the shots on a day-to-day basis?
Well, imagine a finely tuned engine, right? On paper, you've got your 3 branches of government, much like many democratic systems. There's the executive, legislative, and judicial, all designed to keep things running smoothly.
Right, the classic separation of powers we always hear about. So how does that play out in the UAE? Who's got the keys to the car, so to speak?
Think of the Federal Supreme Council as the ultimate steering committee. This is where the rulers of all 7 emirates come together to make the big decisions, setting the overall direction for the nation.
So it's like a boardroom of kings, each with their own interests and agendas. That's got to lead to some interesting negotiations.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But then you've got the Council of Ministers or the Cabinet, which is more like the day-to-day management team. They're the ones responsible for actually implementing the Supreme Council's vision and keeping the government running smoothly.
And who heads up this cabinet? Another king.
Well, this is where it gets interesting. Traditionally, the Prime Minister of the UAE has always come from Dubai. Remember those power dynamics we talked about?
Right. Abu Dhabi might have the oil wealth, but Dubai's got its finger on the pulse of the government's day-to-day operations. It's like a delicate dance between these 2 emirates.
Precisely. And to make things even more intriguing, you've got the Federal National Council, or FNC, which acts as their legislative body. They're the ones drafting and proposing laws. But, and this is big but, their power is actually quite limited.
So there's a parliament, but it doesn't really have that much power. That doesn't sound very democratic.
That's a point of contention for sure. You see, while some members of the FNC are elected, others are directly appointed by the rulers of each emirate. So it's not quite a system where the people have the final say.
It's like they're trying to balance those traditional power structures with the more modern idea of representative government. But what about the judicial branch? Do they have courts and judges like we do?
Absolutely. The UAE's constitution emphasizes the independence of its judiciary with the federal Supreme Court at the top. But there's an added layer of complexity here, Sharia law. While secular laws do exist, Sharia law plays a significant role in legal interpretations and decisions.
So it's a blend of modern legal structures with traditional Islamic law. That's fascinating. But something that really struck me as odd in the Wikipedia article was this phrase, de facto hereditary. He said the presidency is basically passed down within the family, even though they have a constitution. How does that even work?
You've hit on one of the most fascinating and often debated aspects of the UAE's political system. You see, while the Constitution lays out these seemingly modern structures, the reality is deeply intertwined with historical context, tribal traditions, and the enduring influence of certain families.
You mean like political dynasties?
Exactly. Since the UAE's formation, the presidency has always been held by the Al Nahyan clan from Abu Dhabi. And similarly, the Al Maktoum clan from Dubai has traditionally held the prime minister position. It's this fascinating dance between the written rules and the unwritten rules that have shaped the UAE's political landscape.
So we've got this system where certain families have traditionally held the reins of power, even though there's a constitution outlining a more modern system. It's like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. But what I'm really curious about is how all of this actually plays out on the ground in the everyday lives of Emiratis. If each emirate has so much autonomy, what does that actually look like in practice?
It's a great question, and it's something that often gets overlooked when people talk about the UAE. It's easy to get caught up in the federal level with the rulers and the councils, but the real heartbeat of the UAE is happening at the emirate level.
So it's not like these emirates are just following orders from Abu Dhabi.
Not at all. Remember, they have a remarkable degree of self-governance. They control their own budgets, their own development projects, even their own mineral rights. The Wikipedia article actually highlighted Abu Dhabi's structure. It's divided into two municipalities, each with its own.
That's wild. But if the Emirates have so much control over their own resources, does that ever lead to competition? Like, are they all vying for the title of most successful emirate?
There's definitely an element of healthy competition. Each emirate wants to be seen as a leader in its own right. But it's not a cutthroat winner-take-all scenario. The UAE understands that its strength lies in unity and cooperation, even with that decentralization. They've managed to strike this balance between competition and collaboration that's quite remarkable.
It's like they're all on the same team, but still pushing each other to be better. But what about the people's voices in all of this? We've talked about the rulers, the councils, the laws, but where do everyday citizens fit into this complex political puzzle?
That's where things get really interesting. The UAE has this fascinating tradition called the open majlis, which is a direct line of communication between the rulers and the ruled.
Okay, now that sounds promising. Tell me more.
Imagine a town hall meeting, but instead of elected officials, you have the ruler of the emirate, or a representative, listening directly to the concerns of their people. That's the essence of the open majlis.
So it's like a direct democracy in a way. Citizens getting to voice their concerns and potentially influence decisions.
It's a form of direct engagement, for sure. It's rooted in their tribal traditions where dialogue and consensus were highly valued. And it continues to this day with rulers holding these open majlis sessions to hear directly from their people.
That's incredible. It sounds like a system that truly values the voices of its citizens. But I have to ask, how much of this open dialogue is genuine and how much is for show? Because let's face it, the UAE hasn't exactly been a poster child for human rights and freedom of speech.
You're right. The UAE has faced criticism from international organizations about its human rights record. The Wikipedia article mentioned German philosopher Jürgen Habermas rejecting a prestigious award from the UAE, citing concerns about the country's authoritarian tendencies. And then there was the Abu Dhabi secret scandal in 2023, where allegations surfaced that the UAE was spying on individuals they perceived as threats.
Right, like those accusations of them labeling activists and critics as members of the Muslim Brotherhood to silence dissent. That's pretty heavy stuff.
It certainly casts a shadow on the UAE's image as a progressive, tolerant nation, and it raises questions about the true extent of freedom of speech and political dissent within the country.
So it's a bit of a mixed bag. On one hand, you have these traditions of open dialogue and citizen engagement, but on the other hand, there are concerns about human rights and crackdowns on dissent. How does the UAE reconcile these seemingly contradictory aspects of its political system?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Hmm.
The UAE seems to be navigating this constant tension between maintaining stability and control while also trying to project an image of modernity and progress on the global stage. They've implemented some reforms, particularly after the Arab Spring, to modernize their government and address some of these criticisms.
So they're trying to find a balance between holding on to their traditional power structures while also adapting to a changing world.
Precisely. They're walking this tightrope. And it's hard to say for sure which way they'll ultimately lean. Will they embrace more democratic principles and loosen their grip on dissent? Or will they prioritize stability and control above all else?
It sounds like the UAE is at a crossroads, grappling with some big questions about its future direction.
Absolutely. And that's what makes the UAE such a compelling case study. It's a country of contrasts and contradictions, a place where ancient traditions and modern aspirations collide.
It's definitely given us a lot to think about. So, to our listener who requested this deep dive, we hope we've shed some light on the intricate workings of the UAE's political landscape. It's a system full of complexities and nuances, a delicate dance between tradition and modernity, power and reform.
It's a system that challenges our assumptions about how nations should be governed. And it's a reminder that there's often more to a country than meets the eye.
Exactly. So keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deeper into the fascinating world of geopolitics. Who knows what other hidden gems you might uncover?